I was an only kid, and it was just me and my mom. Daddy split while I was just a newborn. It will drive me crazy to ponder. Mom busted her butt, toiling at this job, and that one supporting us so I could stay in those books. She did without so that I could graduate with a grant to pay my way through college, one of the hordes who don't have crippling student loans today. I ended up taking business management, rooted in a harsh concoction of ambition and not wanting to be as poor growing up when I was little. I moved to the city after college LSS. Shitty start in small apartment and eating too many packs of ramen per week to comfortably rest here, so I got a job at one of the big companies, working my way up from junior level along the way. A few years later, and I moved on to working there full-time, into running an entire department. This was hallowed ground. It meant something more than just a paycheck. Those bastards, working alongside me, better know they were appreciated. I would say to newbies taking the trainings, well, you got to lead with respect. Act as if you own this role, and soon enough, not only will you be on the team, but it will turn into your team. Good team, bunch of good folks. My friends or fellowship might say, well, FB had something to do with that department head nod. So what? Yes, it did. And when we got the local bar in Tilinois, just east of Chicago, also celebrated our prediction, come true happiness. It was not pretentious, just comfortable, but where the beer, float and fun abounded. Here's to Natalie, the boss lady, Antonio, the grey-haired sprout who had been one of my first contacts in Maratha Acre when I came there as a cub, held his cup up. The others chimed in, and the sound of glass clinking resonated over the low din. Thanks, guys. We're all in this together. Cheers to more ass-kicking and names taken, folks. I yelled above the din and they roared approvingly back at me. Afterward that night, amidst the back slaps and cheers, I saw him, Ryan. I glanced up, caught by his gaze for just a moment until he grinned at me so lopsidedly it threw off my equilibrium. Saw the celebration go down. What's the occasion? Well, he asked, standing on the Baron. Just a little career boost. I'm the new boss of my department now, or something. Just not too braggadocios. That's impressive. Sounds like it must be a tough gig, and he nodded appreciatively. I'm Ryan, by the way. Natalie. Nice to meet you, Ryan. That night we got to talking and much more serious than I wanted it to be. Well, it turns out Ryan was a bit of a financier. Soulmates, he could manage numbers the way I managed project plans. For the next 6 months, we went on casual dates and then they became weekends together. Within a short time, I was at his place more than my own. His apartment was killer. High ceilings, a brag-worthy view, and warmth that my dingy rental didn't have. One night, gazing out at the city lights from his balcony, Ryan looked suddenly somber. I felt his hands vibrate with nervous energy as he took mine. With you, Natalie, these last months have been remarkable. It might sound soon, but like they say, you just know, right? But is the sentence doubt or belief had already started brewing, he said with such confidence and hope. My gaze drifted as I nodded, the cityscape blurring around me, fear and anxiety making my pulse quicken. From his jacket, he took out a small box and opened it to show the ring shining in all its glory with every sweet spot of light that hit it. Exactly like how his eyes would. Will you marry me, Natalie? Ryan, yes, Ryan. Yes, I could barely choke out the words. Suddenly, I was engaged. This man, who saw me for the first time in my life and loved all of me, even those parts that were spiky with armor. On the day when I was supposed to go meet Ryan's parents, my stomach was in knots. We had traveled to a gorgeous ride-house rodeo in Ryan's truck, drooling overdrive chatter, and as we pulled up behind an expansive domicile whose driveway was longer than my entire boulevard building, I realized that these people weren't just rich, they were stinking loaded. I walked away from the car, and a heavy sense of place was upon me, looking every bit like a prop out of an old British film, made entirely from the reddest brick and complete with climbing ivy and stern-faced gargoyles gazing down on me who clearly knew I wasn't supposed to be there. Ryan took my hand as we approached the massive oak doors. "You're going to be okay, Natalie," he whispered back in words that sounded more like a wish for his own ears than anything. The door opened and her PE coaches stood there, Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove. A single question, the answer to which would likely require my entire month's rent. What was he wearing that coastlands more than I spend on groceries each week, and a summer dress you'd expect to seat New York Fashion Week? Their entryway was huge and had a chandelier hanging from the ceiling that lit up like its own little galaxy. Portraits of scowling gentry with titles such as Sir and Lady festooned the walls. "Natalie, it's so nice to meet you finally. Charles and Eleanor. My wife, I'm Charles Hargrove," Mr. Hargrove said in a smooth voice that was just slightly cold and reminiscent of an English accent he might be trying to copy. She smiled, but there was no warmth in her eyes. I tried to keep my face neutral as we entered the dining room, muttering, "Pleased to meet you both." Ryan was muttering in my ear, telling me which fork to use and blah blah, if you could call it an explanation. Dinner was served, and I could tell by the air, it felt like sitting in a freezer, so absolutely cold with judgment. An austere man with a bristly beard glares back from one of Mr. Hargrove's photos. Sir Reginald Hargrove of England forever rose to the coals. "Got over in the 1800s to set up our family here," he said with arrogance. "Wow," I responded, trying to emote but unable to chew, knowing that every movement was under scrutiny. I went for the salad fork, only to be greeted with silence, my first failure of many. Looking to Ryan for help, but before he could whisper anything in response, her voice came through via Mrs. Hargrove. "Maybe where you come from they do things different, dear," she said, perfectly enunciated each word. "Sorry, still getting the hang of all this," I mumbled, my face growing warm. Ryan came back with us, trying to smooth things over by launching into a story about the two of us, but his parents immediately chose that moment to start laughing themselves silly at my desperate attempts not claw our dessert spoon. Every course made me feel less, to the weight of their eyes was exhausting. We all moved to the Hargroves' cavernous living room following an icy dinner. The rich carpets and drapes only made the room more stifling than this dining hall. I fell into one of the fancy chairs, a display in an exhibit museum on peens. Mrs. Hargrove sat on the front corner of her chair in ladylike anticipation and extended. "Natalie, explain your family. Wow, your childhood must have been very different from ours." My cheeks heated, and I hesitated under Ryan's intense stare. Well, it was mostly me and my mom. My father left when I was very young, so I barely have any impressions about him. Mom tried to do everything so she could support me on her own. She's a nurse. The room fell deathly silent, and then Mrs. Hargrove stood up, her chair screeching along the wood floor as if in agony, and I was screaming outright because oh my god, why would she stand? It is scary, this must be bad, here we go, bye justice, hello, punching bag, hit me motherfuckers. No 030, absolutely unacceptable, she spat out through a look of disgust. Our heritage is situated in that age-old English community. We have standards, traditions. Let them marry pedigree, his daughter-in-law, if he did not say it aloud. Carat, asterisk, but I shall never do so, with my only son marrying a woman devoid of pedigree and ignorant even about her own bloodline. And then it was as if Mr. Hargrove, who had been listening in silence to the exchange of words that flew just moments before, with an airiness so opposite his voice now, and also paused, put one word at a time, weighing what seemed like 3 inches already upon their heads. Family is one thing that we really need to make sure remains strong and organized. We hope for your sake, Natalie. Can you even name your great-grandparents? Embarrassment began to gnaw at me, and I felt my face flush. Actually, I only know my mother's side of the family. I said it barely more than a whisper. Mr. Hargrove sighed, a clear indicator of contempt. He growled nearly a whisper. This is what we dreaded. Ryan had to step in at last, his voice commanding but also begging. Mom, Dad, please. She is nice, she busts her, and she loves me. Shouldn't that be the important thing? His mother's gaze was steely. Rules are all fine and good, Jacob, but respect and consent to my family standards at the end of the day is what counts. Natalie is not yet Holland in action, but she will have to be if she joins this family. If nothing else, she has to respect where she is from. It hurt his feelings and made him none other than plunging into this glow of warmth that had been growing in the land document. His playful gaze is focused directly at me. Come on, Ryan silently says. Grudgingly, I nodded my approval. All right, I fought for control about my response. I will find out your roots and about its customs. My compliance seemed to appease Mrs. Hargrove somewhat. Good. You are going to simply get acclimated with our family tree and know who is whom in those portraits. Natalie, they are part of the things that our lineage leaves to us, he said. While they talked on about these expectations, I began to feel a part of me die inside. What had started as a standard meet and greet became something of an ordeal for the night. Yes, I accepted their demands, but at what price? The discussions moved on to ancestors and noble deeds, while I became acutely aware of the seams keeping me away from these people, these very same reinforced threads clinging Ryan to them all. The weeks after that awkward dinner were a blur. I was working my day job with hardly enough time to breathe, let alone sit through all of the etiquette and style classes Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove insisted I take, back with the buzz of an alarm before sunup, but lights out long after sundown, left me like a zombie and not feeling the best. One of our sessions, elbows off the table, Natalie, had us all rolling. Don't forget, when you spoon it should be in firing position. Soap spoon goes out from your hand into the soup. I kept nodding, trying to navigate my sighs with the vaginal palpation alongside of hers, but I was lost in 1,000 other thoughts. All that work piling up on my desk at office and those ever-growing wedding plans. You're doing well, she reassured, her voice soothing. These things take time to become second nature. I gave her a weak smile. Thanks. It's a lot, you know? As if on cue, my phone rang. It was Mom. I walked outside to take the call, shoving my phone into my ear and looking for a remote spot in this noisy city. Hello, my dear, I said in a voice of someone who had reached the limit. My cousin, Natalie, dear, how are the wedding plans coming along? She inquired, and her voice was one of excitement, yet toned with concern. I wavered, reluctant to concern her. It's all good. I am also busy learning things, even learned how to waltz, I said nonchalantly. She paused, and I could tell she was not entirely sold. You sound exhausted, honey. Are you getting enough rest? None of this should be that difficult. You gotta take care of yourself. I chuckled weakly. Not as well. I think we both know that the proper etiquette classes and dance lessons have to be kept up with. I'll try, Mom, but there is mucho travagando right now. Dos steps a largo y las bodas. Don't forget what matters, Natalie. It's Ryan and you, not all these rules or lessons. Her words were soothing, but as soon we hung up, the reality slipped back onto my shoulders again. I felt like I was splitting my time between trying to please Ryan's parents and stay sane. It seemed to be every day, a marathon, but the racetrack extends indefinitely. I went back inside to continue learning the proper way of holding a wine glass, from stem, not bowl, as if I were lost in my instructor's drone. The few breathers between the chaos had me looking up, thinking, is this really what we worked for? The floating criticism, the non-stop lessons and practice drills, those frosty Hargrove glances whenever I made a mistake, more than some weeks. Funnel roller Millie, in her soft tech tone of voice, had thumped out a message that came through to me one particular evening as I lay down ready for bed. The message was Ryan's, with his words glowing on my screen. How was your day? Miss you. I sat at the message, my fingers in midair. And I never told him much about what was happening with me, all of my worries and frustrations. What I actually typed. Miss you too. Long day, but all good. When I put the phone down, my apartment seemed disturbingly quiet. So, was this how it would be? Overcoming the tiredness, covering my stress with a smile, and simply hoping that I was able to fit in more comfortably than what it seemed because of how outlandish everything around me felt. Finally, it was THE day. The place was full of flowers, ladies in ball macks and top hats jostling with the men about town. I was standing in my billowing white dress out of breath with knots in my stomach. She bent over and smoothed a curl off my forehead when Mom came to take her turn. "Whatever, Natalie," she said with a sweet smile. I so desperately wanted to take her word for it, but as soon as the ceremony started there went any chances of that wedding being nice and easy. Ryan's parents ran a superiority mission. Clearly pleased to be hosting, Mr. Hargrove was accompanied by a loud and proud Mrs. Hargrove who made sure everyone within earshot knew they had contributed so much in making all this possible. I attempted to mingle once the guests were seated, but Mrs. Hargrove pulled me aside first with a frosty smile. "Natalie, darling, take him to our friends. Go get us some drinks, darling. See those old men arguing with each other about politics. You are to fetch from them." But, I began, only to be silenced by a sharp look from her. "No buts. You're not part of the family already. Take a little initiative," she barked at me. I slinked across the restaurant floor in my flowing champagne-colored dress, a tray of macarons hovering between tables as I sighed begrudgingly. I felt like more of a servant than bride that day, because the fabric was exceptionally heavy and also due to what I had been put in charge for. Between those he found time to laugh, chat and other usual stuff when I was struggling. As I carried another round of drinks, Mrs. Hargrove's tone rose above the din. "Natalie, take care of us, and she will be our server tonight. It is good practice for her, right?" Her voice dripped with self-righteousness, eyes flickering to the faces in the crowd. That was the last straw. Cautiously, I softened the edges of my approach, shaking hands, holding her steady by a firm voice. "I am not a server for hire at my own wedding. Some of them should be doing that stuff," pointing to the gathered clothes. Mrs. Hargrove brought up, a mischievous look on her face. "You should be fortunate we were able to accept such a common kneel and gag girl into our family. Natalie, you are nothing," her words like a chilling dagger in the air. My face flushed with anger. "Guys, this is my wedding, not a show for all your friends," I shot back, louder than I probably should have. The room went in silence, all eyes were on us. If memory serves, Ryan overheard the tail end of our conversation and stumbled up, a glass of champagne in hand. "What's going on here?" It was a little garbled, and his eyes weren't quite on the prize. "Ryan, your mother is acting like a maid at our wedding. This is not what today should be about," I snapped in my building frustration. Ryan's face darkened as he watched the silent exchange between his mother and me. "Natalie, why are you acting like a fool? Just do what my mom asks. It's not a big deal." "Not a big deal, Ryan. This is our day, and your mom fucking ruining it," I spat back in disbelief, followed by hurt. He drank some champagne before he spoke. "Natalie, you should consider yourself lucky that I even selected you. You were far from the best girl, a prettier one, a richer. You're being so dramatic." The words punched me like a slap across the face. All this time, realizing had me penitent off. The guy I adored, the man who was about to marry me, did not look at us like a team. I was just some accessory to him, something that had to play the role he wanted. It fitted perfectly in with his parents' ideals of what he should be. Just then, my mom walked over and I gripped my bouquet tighter, because feeling as if you are going to shatter on the spot is a terrifying thing. When I arrived, she took one look at me and pulled my body into hers in an embrace that protected me from the world. "Honey, do you love this man? Is this whom you want to marry?" Her voice was whispery and fear-laden, barely able to find the voice, I shook my head. "No, Mom. I can't do this. I don't want to." I watched as Mom nodded slowly, her jaw clenching in that determined way I recognized all too well. Then she gently wrested the bouquet from my hands before directing me into a chair, her touch steadying. Snatching the mic with a surprising amount of agility, then jerking her face back up to address everyone. The beat drops and in comes the voiceover. "Ladies and gentlemen, please pay close attention." Cut through the murmurs, and every eye in the room focused on her. An eerie silence that makes the hair at the back of your neck stand up, clearing a space for something dark to creep in and take residence. She inhaled deeply and turned back to Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove fully now. "That is not what my latest video says. It starts with, 'I have something significant to share about truth and pretense.'" She uttered, her eyes unwavering. "I attended the same school as Charles and Eleanor Hargrove. They were not English accent playmakers or noble-blooded then, and their people was hard-working, just like our folks." In the crowd, there was a murmur. Charles' father was a mechanic and Eleanor's mother waited tables at the diner down the road. A pause to allow the words sink in. They purchased the portraits, acquired an accent and a surname to create an entire history that kept secret where they were from. A murmur fell over the room as guests turned to gape at the Hargroves. Mrs. Hargrove jumped up, her face bright red, and the mask of aristocracy had fallen away completely. "That's preposterous. But my mom wasn't finished. For you to stand on these lies and condemn my daughter as unworthy based on a falsehood. Thousand of false labels as one literally. Liu AKV HIC pantomime woman ACIVUS, she is real. Something that you have long forgotten how to be." The guests were whispering now, their looks of interest melting into scorn as they beheld the Hargroves. Hargrove struggled to speak, his accent sliding like water into something more common and less refined and also source. "We did what we felt was the right thing." "For whom?" "So my mom, very fierce. Cut him off. For your son? For society? Or is this just for your own dirty vanity?" The room was alive now. News of the confrontation had spread and gossip was in a frenzy occults, filled with tension and secrets. The grandiosity of the Hargroves appeared to collapse and wither away into dust, leaving only a grim reminder that they were built on refuse. A look of shock and rage scrunched Ryan's features. I beckoned him over, and he entered my line of sight, his voice a mere growl as it drew closer. "Natalie, you have truly fucked everything. You dishonored my family, and now you have the nerve to ask me if I want to marry you after what happened out there." His words hurt, and I started to lash out when he gripped my arm, lightly pulling me toward him a foot. "I will teach you to be a good wife and submit without reason." That was them, hovering over us, and it weighed down on the shrinking space between my dad's threat. More chapters to be updated soon. Stay tuned. Stepping away from him, I yanked my arm back with everything that was in me. The room was silent, all eyes on us now. He was the man I planned to someday marry. This was about to be my new family. No, this couldn't be my life. I inhaled deeply, remembering the courage of my mother only moments before. I announced to the entire wedding, "There will be no wedding. I hope to God that I never consider marrying a blood relative of such arrogant and deceitful people again." There were gasps and hushed conversations in response. Ryan looked at me open-mouthed, like as if he could catch the words and shove them back into my beak. Mom appeared in my way and acted as a shield against the chaos. We walked together through the crowd with our heads high. The next several weeks, rumors of the Hargroves' shame wound their way across town. Their invented nobility and society status was as thin as the edge of playing cards on a windy day. Those who once respected them now crossed the road to shun their disgrace. The family sold their mansion and moved out of the area to make a new life for themselves, free from an earlier that would never let up. As for Ryan, I gathered snippets, whisperings of tailspins and evenings drowning in drink over the scandal. Maybe I did not believe them, hell, maybe I did not want to. He showed his hand, and it was covered in too dark a sin for me to ever want to turn over my cards back. And one night, sitting in our tiny living room, a modest space compared to the grandeur of artificiality, I almost married into it with my mom. Thank you, Mom, for everything. For always being there, for standing up to me, even before I could have seen the truth myself. She smiled and squeezed my hand. Natalie, I'm always gonna be here. You are my daughter, and I have raised you to be strong and true. No man, no family will ever lower your worth. The TV chattered behind us, and it was a familiar, comforting normalcy. I lost a fiancé, but gained my life back. I got myself again, and more importantly, I was in control of the rest of it. Returning to work seemed like a sanctuary after the entire wedding disaster. My colleagues, knowing the circus that has been my life as of lately, were nothing but supportive. The second I swooped into the office, Antonio was singing, "Natalie, you are a lucky girl, and got yourself a MoMA." He was perched on my desk, a mug full of hot coffee in his hand, which he passed off to me as some sort of truce or homecoming present. "Thanks, Antonio. Feels good to be back," I said, reaching for the coffee and drinking in its cozy bitterness. "And that bullet is more like a frisking cannonball," Jenny added from her cubicle next door. "Any man who lets you serve visitors on your wedding day is not husband material. You deserve way better, honorable." I smiled, glad to have company. "I think so too." Hopped back to where I belong and am not only valued for whose family also sweetie cookie pie, etc. ad nauseam. Their support never faltered week after week. This was during the time I was healing when David entered my life. He was a friend of a friend, pretty ordinary type of background, sociable and easy with his smile. We had met over a small party. This was low-key, an informal group Friday afternoon. Entered and he was standing there laughing over something stupid. "Hey, are you Natalie?" he said, standing up. I thought, oh no, he knows my life has been an unmitigated disaster. Damn, this cocksucker must have done his homework beforehand if he's saying nice things to me. Thanks, David. Still, I felt it my duty as his older sister to ease doubts by saying, or paraphrasing, "What happened?" We hit it off instantly. The Hargroves had a family that was the complete opposite of their own. His parents hugged me and smiled real smiles the first time I met them. When I walked in their front door, his mom enveloped me in a hug and said, "Natalie, we're just so happy that David has found someone who makes him this happy." Refreshing. How simple it all was. No faking involved, no pretensions required, just pure honesty and vulnerability. We were in no hurry. David was right there with me. We were moving slowly, seeing each other deeper than just face value. I came back home, and when I returned to work one day, my boss called me into his office. "You can say this something secretly to Natalie that, Nat, all of us have seen how you are managing everything. It has not been a guarantee, but your high quality of performance will get you through." I nodded in agreement, having no clue where this conversation was going. "We believe it's time for a new deal. You showcase that you can do almost everything, and your control over the room has never been as solid." Stepping out of his office, I was filled with pride. Fresh new relationship blossoming, developing career and respect from the people that mattered to me. I was finally where it seemed like I fit in.